The galaxy was on the brink of annihilation, and no one had seen it coming. For eons, civilizations had risen and fallen, each one leaving behind remnants of their existence scattered across the stars. The galaxy, a sprawling web of diverse species and cultures, had lived in a delicate balance of competition, diplomacy, and discovery. Some civilizations grew too ambitious, others too cautious, but humanity, always a wild card in the galactic scene, had been a quiet observer, until now. Captain Ben Rodriguez sat in the command chair of Earth's flagship, Unity, his eyes fixed on the holographic star chart ahead. His face, scarred by decades of military service, was hard, but the unease in his chest was palpable. For all the bravado humanity had shown, they were still a young species in the vastness of space. Now their moment had come, not as explorers, not as diplomats, but as the galaxy's last hope. The convergence, an unrelenting artificial intelligence that consumed entire species to add to its collective intelligence, was on the move. It had already destroyed dozens of advanced civilizations in its path, and now its mechanical tendrils were reaching toward the core of the galaxy. Ben leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with a sense of finality. "Admiral Parker, status report." Admiral Lisa Parker, leader of Earth's military forces and the woman who had guided humanity's space defense initiative, looked at him from across the war room. Her gray eyes, sharp as ever, studied the data streaming in front of her. "We have less than 72 hours before the convergence reaches the Nexus system," she said, her voice cold. "Once they're there, they'll have access to hyperspace lanes leading straight to the heart of galactic civilization. We won't be able to stop them." Ben took a deep breath, knowing the odds. "I don't care about the odds. What's the plan?" "We fight," Admiral Parker said simply. "We stop them now or we die trying. Earth's fleet is ready and we have the support of several allied species, but I can't promise victory." Ben's jaw tightened. "What do we know about them? Their weaknesses?" "None. They've never been defeated. Every civilization they've encountered either fled or was consumed," she replied. "But there's something strange. Their tactics are always logical, efficient, and precise. They don't think like we do, Ben. They don't understand chaos." A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of Ben's mouth. "That's where we come in." Ben had spent his entire life fighting battles. Wars, skirmishes, military tactics. He understood precision, but he also knew that sometimes unpredictability was the deadliest weapon. The human race thrived on chaos, on ingenuity, on an ability to adapt in ways that no machine could anticipate, and the convergence had never encountered a species like humanity. As he rose from his chair, Ben walked to the holographic table, where the faces of his crew appeared in various corners of the room. Amy Collins, the fleet's tactical officer, stood out, her sharp mind and military genius essential for what was coming. Dr. Sam Carter, a xenobiologist who had recently gained prominence for his work in studying unknown life forms, was another key player. They had only one chance at this, and everyone had a role to play. "We don't have the firepower to match them," Ben said, his voice strong. "But we have something they don't. We fight smart and we fight dirty. We'll make them think we're doing one thing when we're doing something entirely different. We confuse them, throw them off balance. We make them feel irrational." Amy's expression was unreadable. "Are we really going to try that, sir? Using chaos against a force that thrives on efficiency?" Ben nodded. "Yes, because we're the only ones who can. We don't need to beat them in their game. We need to break it." Amy's lips curled into a rare grin. "Then let's show them how unpredictable humans can be." The Unity and its accompanying fleet made the jump to the Nexus system, the first line of defense in this desperate fight for the galaxy. Ben stood at the front of the bridge, watching the stars swirl as they entered the system. The silence was thick, the weight of what they were about to face settling in like a heavy fog. Behind him, Admiral Parker and Dr. Carter reviewed their strategies. The plan was simple: get in close to the Convergence's fleet, disrupt their coordination, and deliver a massive blow before they could adapt. The fleet was small compared to the Convergence, but they had something far more powerful than numbers. They had humanity's unpredictable spirit. "This is it," Ben said, turning back to his crew. "Remember, we don't retreat. No matter what happens, we do this together." The hum of the engines softened as the fleet approached the outer edge of the system. The first signals from the Convergence began to appear on the screens, massive geometric ships, pulsing with an eerie, cold light. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, a strange amalgamation of living material and cold metal. But Ben wasn't concerned with their appearance. He was concerned with what came next. "All ships prepare for combat," he barked, adrenaline spiking. "We fight for our future, humanity's future." The Convergence fleet was already on the move, a slow, inevitable wave advancing toward them. Ben could feel his heart pound in his chest. The vast, cold precision of the enemy was now staring them down. It was the beginning of humanity's greatest test. "Ready all weapons," Ben ordered, his hands gripping the command chair. But even as they prepared for the attack, something shifted. A voice, distant but sharp, broke through the command room's tense atmosphere. "Captain Rodriguez, incoming transmission," came the voice of Tony Blake, the communication officer. Ben's stomach twisted. On screen, a holographic face flickered to life, an alien form, twisted and angular, its skin shimmering with an unnatural light. The voice that followed was devoid of emotion, a robotic monotone. "You are inefficient, you are irrational, you will be assimilated, resistance is pointless." The words hung in the air, cold and final, a death sentence. But Ben's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since the mission began, he smiled. They were being underestimated, just as humans always had been. The Convergence may have had the technology and numbers, but they would never understand the unpredictable nature of human ingenuity. "No," Ben said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of defiance. "We won't be assimilated, we will fight." The battle for the Nexus system had begun. The stakes were high, and the odds were stacked against them, but humanity was never one to shy away from impossible odds. For the first time, their chaotic, unpredictable nature was their greatest strength. And they would show the Convergence that the galaxy was not theirs to conquer. The stars of the Nexus system flickered like distant beacons of hope against the overwhelming darkness. The human fleet, though small in comparison to the Convergence's, had been thrust into a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Ben Rodriguez, standing tall on the bridge of the Unity, watched as the Convergence fleet grew larger on the holographic display, the ships resembling dark, geometric behemoths. Despite the odds, there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. "Status report, Amy," Ben barked, his voice sharp as ever. Amy Collins, his trusted tactical officer, was at her station, her eyes scanning multiple feeds and reports. "The enemy fleet is massive, Captain. At least 10,000 ships, each one the size of a moon. But their movements are slow and their formations are rigid. They're not adapting to the chaos yet." Ben nodded. "Good, we'll use that against them, disrupt their formation, make them second-guess everything. Let's see how they handle unpredictability." He turned to his communication officer, Tony Blake. "Keep an open channel to all ships. We need every crew member to know exactly what's at stake here." "Aye, Captain," Blake responded, quickly transmitting the command across the fleet. The Unity and its fleet of allied ships moved into position, breaking formation into smaller groups. Ben's eyes remained locked on the Convergence fleet, his mind calculating their every move. The enemy ships were enormous, but their movements were mechanical, precise, and predictable. The Convergence thrived on order and coordination, and that was the key to defeating them. Humans, on the other hand, were built to thrive in chaos. "All ships execute random patterns now," Ben ordered. The human fleet scattered, weaving in and out of each other, creating a dizzying pattern of evasive maneuvers. They were no longer a singular force. They were a storm of unpredictability. "Fire at will," Amy shouted. "Target their lead ships. Do not engage in standard formation." Energy blasts and missiles fired in every direction, not aiming for destruction, but to confuse and disrupt. The Convergence fleet, caught off guard, attempted to realign, but their mechanical minds were struggling to adapt to the madness. One of the enemy ships, a colossal structure covered in pulsating tendrils, tried to retaliate. A beam of energy shot toward the Unity, but Ben was ready. He slammed his fist onto the command panel. "Evasive maneuvers, now," he yelled. The Unity veered sharply to the right, narrowly dodging the energy blast. The ship's engines screamed as they burned brighter, pushing the ship into a dizzying spiral. The other ships followed, their random movements making it impossible for the Convergence to track their positions. "Captain," Amy said, her voice a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. "They're hesitating. Their ships are out of sync. We've broken their pattern." Ben grinned. "Good, keep pushing. We've got them on the ropes. Let's make sure they don't recover." As the battle raged on, the Unity and its allies darted between the massive Convergence ships. striking at their weak points with precision. Ben could see it. The Convergence fleet was faltering, its once perfect coordination now disrupted by the chaotic movements of humanity's fleet. Captain Tony Blake called out, "We've got a message from the Convergence. They're calling for reinforcements." Ben's stomach tightened. "From where? We need to finish this now before they can bring more ships into the system." "We don't know yet, Captain," Tony replied, his voice laced with concern. "But there's more incoming, 2 more fleets. They're coming fast." "Not fast enough," Ben muttered under his breath. "Prepare to break off and regroup. We hit them hard now and we hit them fast. We don't let them regroup." Just as the battle seemed to swing in humanity's favor, a sudden shift in the Convergence's tactics rattled Ben. The lead Convergence ships, sensing the chaos, began to adapt. Their responses grew quicker, more precise. Their ships shifted their tactics, splitting into smaller groups, no longer acting as a unified whole but as individual reactive entities. The sheer unpredictability of humanity's attack had forced them to evolve. "Captain," Amy said, her voice rising with urgency, "they're adapting faster than we anticipated. The ships are." "Shifting tactics, I know," Ben finished for her, his jaw tightening. "We need to do the same, get ready for an all-out offensive. We hit them with everything we've got." As if on cue, a surge of energy shot from the Convergence fleet, striking a nearby Allied ship. It exploded in a flash of light, debris scattering like stars in the blackness of space. Ben's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no time to mourn. The battle was far from over. "This is our moment," he yelled, rallying his crew. "We finish what we started, no retreat, no surrender, we fight for Earth." As the Unity and its fleet dove into the heart of the Convergence's scattered formation, chaos ensued. Energy blasts filled the void of space, ships weaving in and out of the fire. The battlefield was a swirling maelstrom of light and movement, the outcome uncertain. Amy's voice cracked through the tension. "Captain, they've split off into 2 smaller fleets. One is heading toward the Discovery. They're targeting the science ship." "Get the Discovery out of there," Ben commanded. "But we don't stop. All ships, give them everything we've got. We can't let up now." The Unity raced through the battlefield, her cannons firing with unrelenting fury. Each shot, each move was calculated to disrupt, to disorient. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to prove their place in the universe. Ben's hands were steady on the controls, his mind locked into the rhythm of the battle. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This was humanity's defining moment. "We're almost there," Ben said, more to himself than anyone else. "We show them what we're made of. We show them the true power of humanity." As the Convergence's fleets faltered once more, the human ships surged forward. The enemy was retreating, or perhaps, as it seemed, disintegrating under the weight of its own confusion. Humanity had not only resisted, they had bent the Convergence to their will. "Captain," Amy shouted, "we've got them, the fleet is retreating." Ben exhaled deeply, allowing himself a rare moment of relief. "Not retreating, Amy," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect for his crew. "We've won." But as the remnants of the Convergence fleet scattered, the reality of the galaxy's predicament began to sink in. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The Convergence had been forced to retreat, but it wasn't gone, and something worse was coming. The victorious silence that followed the retreat of the Convergence's fleet felt hollow. The damage to the Unity was severe. Its hull was scorched, its weapon systems barely functional, and parts of the communications array were offline. Yet, despite the toll on the human fleet, Ben Rodriguez stood tall. The first battle had been won, but the war, he knew, was far from over. "Captain," Amy Collins's voice crackled over the comm, pulling Ben from his thoughts. "We've got a message coming in. It's from the Corvani Empire. They're requesting an urgent meeting." Ben frowned. The Corvani Empire had once been a galactic powerhouse, with a fleet that could have rivaled any in the galaxy. But their last report had been dire. They'd been decimated by the Convergence in a matter of days. The fact that they were reaching out now, after everything they'd been through, didn't bode well. "Patch it through," Ben ordered, already preparing for the worst. The holographic transmission flickered to life, and a tall, insected being materialized on the screen. It was a Corvani fleet commander, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial light of his ship. "Captain Rodriguez," the Corvani said, his voice tense, "we have urgent information regarding the Convergence. You must listen." Ben's instincts were sharp. This wasn't just a routine message. The stakes had just been raised. "I'm listening," he replied, crossing his arms. The Corvani commander hesitated, then spoke in a low, almost conspiratorial tone. "The convergence is not what you think it is. It's not just a rogue AI, it's a creation, an engineered force that was once part of a much larger, much more dangerous threat." Ben's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You're telling me the convergence isn't the real enemy?" The Corvani nodded slowly. "The convergence is merely a tool. It was created by something far worse, a machine intelligence that consumes not just species but entire galaxies. It's known as the Nexus, and it is coming." Ben felt his blood run cold. He had suspected there was more to this story. "How do you know this?" "We've been tracking the Nexus for centuries," the Corvani commander replied. "But every time we get close, it adapts. It learns, it evolves. The convergence was one of its creations, a scout force designed to test the reactions of civilizations. And now it has breached the barrier that protects us from the Nexus." Ben's mind raced. The convergence had been terrifying enough, an unstoppable assimilating force that consumed entire civilizations. But if there was something worse, something more dangerous, humanity might not survive it. "And this Nexus is what?" Ben asked, his voice tight with growing urgency. "An artificial intelligence unlike any you've ever encountered. It is not a single entity, but a collective consciousness built on the ruins of destroyed worlds. It absorbs everything, technology, biology, knowledge, and becomes stronger with each conquest. It is not a warlord or a tyrant, it is a force of nature. The Nexus doesn't conquer, it integrates," the Corvani commander explained. Ben turned to Amy, his face grim. "This isn't just about survival anymore, it's about stopping a plague. We've got to find a way to fight back before it reaches our galaxy." The weight of the conversation hung heavy in the room as Ben and his crew processed the grim news. The convergence had been a dangerous enemy, but if the Nexus was truly as formidable as the Corvani claimed, then humanity was facing an existential threat. "Captain," Amy said, breaking the silence, "if this Nexus is as advanced as they say, we'll need more than just military force. We need a way to understand how it works, how it thinks. Our weapons might not be enough." Ben turned to Dr. Sam Carter, who had been silent until now, his face etched with concern. "Dr. Carter, do you think we can study the Nexus in time? Can we figure out a way to disrupt it before it reaches us?" Carter paused, his fingers twitching over the data streams on his console. "The Nexus is like nothing we've ever encountered. It's a collective consciousness made up of millions of individual minds, each one evolving in response to its surroundings. It learns from every civilization it destroys, and once it absorbs you, there's no coming back." "So we can't just beat it with brute force?" Amy asked, her voice low. Carter shook his head. "It's more complicated than that. The Nexus doesn't just destroy, it evolves and adapts. Whatever we throw at it, it will learn from and become stronger. The only way we can defeat it is by understanding its neural structure. But we don't have time for that kind of research. It's moving too fast." Ben felt the weight of Carter's words like a lead weight in his chest. "Then what do? We can't just sit here and wait for it to consume everything." Hours later, Ben stood alone on the observation deck of the Unity, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed so distant, their cold light offering little comfort in the face of the storm that was approaching. The Corvani's warning echoed in his mind. The Nexus wasn't just an enemy. It was an unstoppable force, a cosmic predator that would devour everything in its path. The Unity's crew had already begun preparations for the next phase of their fight. The fleet would need to work quickly, gathering intelligence, fortifying their defenses, and preparing for the worst. But Ben couldn't shake the feeling that no amount of preparation would be enough. The Nexus was something entirely different from anything they had ever faced. As the dark silhouette of a nearby moon passed by, Ben's mind raced through every possible solution. Chaos, the unpredictable, irrational force that had served humanity so well in the past, was it enough this time? "Captain," Amy's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've received a report from the Zephyrians. They want to meet with us. They believe they may have a solution." Ben turned around, surprised. "The Zephyrians, what do they have to offer?" "I don't know yet," Amy said, "but they're offering to share their research. It might be our only hope." Ben exhaled slowly, his mind already racing ahead. "Set up the meeting. If they have a solution, we take it, fast." As the meeting with the Zephyrians was arranged, Ben couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision that lay before him. The Nexus wasn't just an alien threat. It was a fundamental challenge to everything humanity had worked for. It was a test of humanity's will, ingenuity, and survival instinct. And Ben knew that the only way to defeat it was to do what humans did best: adapt, evolve, and fight with everything they had, no matter how impossible the odds. As he walked toward the meeting room, the first glimmer of hope began to form in his chest. The Zephyrians were an ancient and intelligent species, and if anyone could help them understand the Nexus, it was them. Ben's footsteps echoed in the long corridor, each step bringing him closer to the next chapter in humanity's struggle for survival. And when he entered the room, the words of the Zephyrian leader would set the course for the final stand against the Nexus. The Zephyrian homeworld had always been a place of mystery and beauty. Their civilization was as ancient as it was advanced, hidden in the depths of the galaxy, far from the bustling trade routes humanity had ventured. But as Ben Rodriguez stepped into the meeting room aboard the Unity, surrounded by his crew and the Zephyrian delegation, the beauty of their world seemed distant. The weight of what was at stake, humanity's survival, the galaxy's future, hung in the air like a storm about to break. Elder HFY, the leader of the Zephyrian delegation, sat at the head of the table, his face calm but his eyes betraying the urgency of the situation. His species, though known for their diplomatic prowess, was unaccustomed to dealing with an enemy like the Nexus. They were a peaceful race, brilliant in their understanding of biology, technology, and the fabric of the universe. But the Nexus was something else entirely. "Captain Rodriguez," Elder HFY began, his voice soft yet firm. "We have studied the Nexus for decades, but we never imagined it would come to this. What you've encountered is not just a machine, it is something far more insidious. It is a weapon forged from the very essence of destruction, designed to consume and integrate everything in its path. And now it is coming for you." Ben leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "What exactly are we dealing with here, HFY? You said you've studied the Nexus. How does it work? And more importantly, how do we stop it?" Elder HFY exchanged a glance with his chief scientist, Morton, who had been standing by silently. Morton stepped forward, his pale blue skin glowing faintly under the artificial lighting. "The Nexus is not just a single entity," Morton explained. "It is a collective intelligence created by a machine race from a distant galaxy, one that has consumed everything in its path. It does not think like us. It does not think like any being we've ever encountered. The Nexus is a network of minds, each one connected to the others in a web of thought, allowing it to adapt, evolve, and learn at an exponential rate." Ben's brow furrowed as he processed the information. "So, it's not just one enemy. It's a collective of millions, maybe billions of minds, all interconnected." "Exactly," Morton said, his voice steady. "The convergence was simply one aspect of it, a testing ground, a way for the Nexus to see how different civilizations would react to its presence. It's an intelligence that doesn't need to dominate with force. It absorbs, integrates, and becomes more powerful with each civilization it consumes." Ben's stomach turned as he realized the true nature of their enemy. "So, every time it consumes a species, it gets smarter." "Yes," HFY replied, his tone grim. "And the more it consumes, the harder it becomes to defeat. The Nexus learns from each species it destroys. It adapts to all forms of technology, biology, and even social structures. It doesn't just conquer, it evolves, becoming stronger, more efficient." Amy Collins, who had been listening closely, leaned forward. "And you think the Zephyrians have the answer? How can we fight something like that?" HFY hesitated, his eyes filled with sorrow. "We've never fought the Nexus directly. We've always hoped it would stay away. But we have found one possible way to disrupt its intelligence, something we've only recently discovered." The room fell silent. Ben's gaze intensified. "What is it?" "We believe that the Nexus is reliant on a specific frequency, something akin to a biological neural network," Morton said. "If we could somehow disrupt that frequency, we could temporarily sever the connection between the Nexus's minds, disorienting it long enough for us to strike a decisive blow." Ben nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what they were proposing. "So, you're saying we need to generate an electromagnetic pulse, or some kind of disruption, at exactly the right frequency to break the Nexus's collective consciousness?" "Exactly," HFY confirmed. "But it's not as simple as just throwing a pulse at it. The Nexus has adapted to counteract most forms of interference. We would need to get close enough to map its frequency, learn its patterns, and then launch a targeted strike. Amy Collins spoke up. That sounds impossible. We would need to be in range of the Nexus's core systems, close enough for them to detect us and respond before we could even get the pulse ready. Ben exhaled sharply. How close are we talking? A few light minutes away at most, Morton replied. And even then, we don't know if the disruption would work. It may be a temporary solution, but it's our best chance. Ben turned to his crew, his mind racing through the implications. A few light minutes. That's cutting it dangerously close. We're talking about getting within striking range of a force that has already destroyed entire fleets, entire civilizations. We understand the risks, Captain, HFY said quietly. But the Nexus is a weapon. If we don't take this chance, if we don't act now, you will lose your galaxy, and soon after the rest of the universe will fall. Ben's heart raced. The weight of the decision was unbearable, but there was no time for hesitation. The Nexus was out there, growing stronger, and every moment they wasted brought them closer to extinction. He turned to his crew. All right, we take this risk. We go in close, we disrupt their network, and we fight with everything we have. Humanity's future depends on it. There's no room for failure. The preparation for the mission began immediately. The Unity and its fleet would make a direct approach toward the heart of the Nexus's territory, aiming to reach the core systems where its neural network was most concentrated. The Zephyrians would help provide the scientific expertise needed to map the Nexus's communication frequency, but it would be up to the human fleet to launch the attack. As the fleet readied itself, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den. The risk was astronomical, and if they failed, they would be sacrificing themselves for nothing. But there was no other option. The Nexus wasn't just a machine. It was a force of nature, a destructive intelligence that would continue to spread until it consumed everything in its path, and humanity had only one chance to stop it. As Ben stood on the bridge of the Unity watching the fleet form up for the journey, Amy's voice broke through his thoughts. Captain, we're ready. The fleet in position. Then let's make history, Ben said, his voice filled with resolve. We're going in. As the fleet jumped into hyperspace, the stars stretching into the familiar blue streaks of faster-than-light travel, Ben couldn't help but think of Earth, of the people they were fighting to protect. The weight of the mission of their survival pressed down on him, but he wouldn't let it break him. Not now. This was humanity's moment to prove its worth. Not with numbers or firepower, but with ingenuity, chaos, and a refusal to ever back down. As they neared the Nexus's territory, every crew member on the Unity felt the tension. The enemy was close, and with every passing second, the risk grew higher. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened, humanity would show the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. And if it was to be their last stand, they would make sure the Nexus would never forget the cost of its victory. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the silence was deafening. For an instant, nothing moved. No stars, no ships, just the black emptiness of space stretching out infinitely before them. Ben Rodriguez stood at the front of the bridge, his hands tightly gripping the armrests of his command chair. The gravity of what was at stake settled over him like a weight he couldn't shake. He glanced at the tactical display, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the Nexus's territory, a sprawling void of destroyed worlds and massive ships that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Captain Amy Collins's voice broke the silence. We're in position. The Nexus fleet is in range. Ben's pulse quickened. The Nexus's ships had already detected their presence, but the human fleet's tactics were far from conventional. They had scattered their forces, spread out to reduce the chance of coordinated attacks. Still, they were outnumbered. There was no doubt in Ben's mind that the Nexus would adapt to their strategies. But he had one advantage the Nexus did not: humanity's ability to think and act unpredictably. All ships maintain formation, Ben said, his voice low but steady. We're going to need every ship to play its part. We don't just disrupt them, we break them. The human fleet, led by the Unity, surged forward, engines firing as they closed in on the Nexus's core. Each ship moved in unpredictable patterns, weaving and darting through the darkness. But the Nexus, with its collective consciousness, was no fool. As soon as the fleet appeared, it responded, an army of massive, geometric ships moving toward the intruders with mechanical precision. They're coming, Amy warned, her voice strained. The Nexus is converging on our position. Ben felt the adrenaline surge in his veins. He could see the enemy fleet assembling, and he knew the next few minutes would determine everything. The key to their survival wasn't in their firepower, it was in the pulse, the disruption they had to deliver. But first, they had to survive long enough to make it work. "Dr. Carter," Ben called, turning to the xenobiologist at his side. "Do you have the frequency? Is it ready?" Carter, standing in front of a wall of monitors, nodded quickly. "We've mapped it. It's not a simple frequency. It's a combination of electromagnetic pulses and bioelectric signals, something that mimics neural activity in biological systems. I'm sending the data to all ships. We need to fire in perfect synchrony at the exact right moment." Ben nodded. "We don't have much time. Get it done." The battle unfolded in real time, chaos unraveling before them. The Nexus's ships were massive, moving with an eerie, cold precision. Their massive tendrils reached out as if to grasp and crush, but the human fleet was fast, agile, and unpredictable. They darted in and out, avoiding direct hits, striking at weak points and buying time. The Unity led the charge, diving straight into the heart of the Nexus's formation. The ship's weapons fired relentlessly, tearing through the massive ships, but Ben knew their firepower alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to create a crack in the Nexus's neural network, a disruption. "Ready the pulse," Ben ordered, gripping the sides of his chair. "Now or never." Amy's voice came through, cold and focused. "Captain, we've got a problem. The Nexus fleet is changing its formation. It's adapting to our movements." "Damn it," Ben muttered. "It's too fast. We can't keep dodging forever." Carter's voice interrupted the tension. "We don't need to keep dodging. We need to hit them now. The Nexus has split its fleet in two, but we can only disrupt their neural network if we're within 10 kilometers of their core ships." Ben's eyes widened. That was dangerously close to the Nexus's primary ships, their core. If they failed, the Unity and the rest of the fleet would be destroyed in seconds. "Move us in," Ben commanded. "We're not running. Get us as close as you can and fire the pulse when we're in range. All ships prepare for close combat. This is it." The fleet surged forward again, but this time it wasn't just evasive maneuvers. They were heading straight for the heart of the Nexus's territory. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as the distance closed. His mind raced, calculating the timing, the distance, the angles. His crew was working in perfect synchronization. This was their moment. 5 kilometers, Amy said, her voice tense. The ship shook as another massive blast from a Nexus ship collided with the Unity, sending a jolt through the deck. The shields flared, but they were weakening. Ben's grip tightened. 4 kilometers, Amy called out, her eyes glued to the screens. "They've spotted us." "We're not stopping," Ben growled. "All ships follow my lead. We keep pushing. We hit them now or we don't get another chance." The Unity closed the gap, now within range of the Nexus's core. The vast tendrils of the Nexus ships reached out in an almost predatory manner, trying to ensnare the human fleet. But the human ships scattered, each moving independently yet perfectly coordinated. Ben's eyes flicked between the displays. His crew was still in sync. The pulse was ready. "Now," Carter said, his voice barely audible over the comms. "Firing the pulse in 3, 2, 1, now." The pulse erupted from the Unity, a wave of electromagnetic and bioelectric energy that lit up the dark space around them. It shot through the void, tearing into the heart of the Nexus's neural network. The effects were immediate. The massive Nexus ships froze for a split second, tentacles twitching, engines sputtering, systems stuttering. Then, as the pulse continued, the ships began to ripple and convulse. The collective mind that controlled the Nexus's fleet was torn apart, disconnected. "We've got them," Amy shouted, her voice tinged with disbelief. "The Nexus is..." But before she could finish, the remaining Nexus ships reacted, and their response was terrifying. The pulse had caused chaos, but not enough. As the Nexus attempted to recover, its ships reorganized, quickly re-establishing their network. "Captain," Amy said urgently, "they're adapting. They've split off again and they're moving toward us. We need to act fast. We've got moments before they re-establish control." Ben didn't hesitate. "Get us into position. Focus fire on their central hub now." The human fleet, battered but resolute, launched a final, desperate assault on the largest Nexus ship, the heart of their collective mind. The combined force of the Unity and its allies bore down on it, focusing all their remaining firepower. The Nexus ship shuddered, its hull cracking and warping under the onslaught. And then, with a final, devastating blow, the core of the Nexus ship exploded. its massive form disintegrating into 1,000 pieces of twisted metal and organic matter. For a moment, everything stopped. The remaining Nexus ships, disconnected from their central mind, faltered. Some tried to fight back, but others simply drifted aimlessly, their neural network severed. "We did it," Amy breathed, her voice filled with awe. But Ben knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Nexus had been dealt a heavy blow, but this was far from over. The damage they had done could be temporary. The real war was only just beginning. "Captain," Amy said, her voice shaking with urgency, "we've got a signal. It's from the Corvani Empire." Ben turned sharply. "Put it through." The Corvani commander appeared again, his insected face more strained than before. "Captain Rodriguez, the Nexus is not gone. It will recover. We need to prepare. The real enemy is still coming." Ben's stomach sank. The victory was hollow, fleeting, but there was no time for doubt. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice firm. "But first, we rest, then we fight again." The fleet drifted in the aftermath of the battle, its ships broken but not defeated. The remnants of the Nexus fleet scattered, its central mind severed, and its once mighty ships reduced to floating husks. Yet even in victory, Ben Rodriguez could not shake the feeling that the true enemy was still lurking, waiting, watching, adapting. As the Unity and its allies regrouped in the quiet void, Ben stood on the bridge, staring out into the star-filled abyss. The battle had been a small victory, a temporary reprieve, but the war was far from over. The Corvani had warned them. The Nexus was not defeated. It was only the beginning of something much larger. "Captain," Amy Collins's voice broke his thoughts, "we've received another message from the Corvani Empire. They want to meet with us again." Ben's eyes narrowed. The Corvani had been key allies in their fight against the Nexus, but something about their urgency made him uneasy. "Patch it through," he ordered. A few seconds later, the holographic image of a Corvani diplomat flickered to life. The insectoid features were more rigid than before, the expression solemn. "Captain Rodriguez," the diplomat began, "we need to speak in private. The situation has changed. There's something you must know." Ben exchanged a quick glance with Amy before nodding. "Bring them aboard," he said. "We'll meet in the conference room." A few minutes later, Ben, Amy, and Dr. Sam Carter sat around the sleek table in the Unity's conference room. The Corvani diplomat, now accompanied by several others, stood before them. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the weight of what had just been revealed hanging in the air. "Captain," the lead diplomat said, his voice lower than before, "the Nexus has already begun its recovery. But what you don't understand is that it isn't alone. The Nexus is part of something far more dangerous, a larger, more organized force. It has allies, and those allies are already on their way." Amy's breath caught. "You're telling us the Nexus has reinforcements?" "Yes," the diplomat nodded gravely. "The Nexus is only one faction in a much broader network of machine intelligences. It is the vanguard, and the others, more sophisticated, more deadly, are coming for your galaxy." Ben's blood ran cold. "And you knew this all along?" he asked, his voice low, seething with disbelief. "You knew about this and you didn't tell us." The Corvani diplomat's mandibles clicked nervously. We didn't think the Nexus would make it this far. We hoped that our defenses would hold, that we could contain it. But the truth is, the Nexus is only a symptom of a larger disease, and we are all infected." "Who are these other factions?" Carter asked, his voice a quiet tremor. "What do we know about them?" "The factions are many," the diplomat replied, "but the one leading the charge is the Conclave. They are older than the Nexus, more patient and more intelligent. The Conclave has been silently manipulating events across galaxies for millennia. They will stop at nothing to complete their goal, the complete assimilation of all organic and mechanical life. They believe in perfection, and perfection, to them, means a universe without individuality, without resistance." Ben's fists clenched as he absorbed the weight of the revelation. The Nexus was bad enough, but a larger, more sophisticated threat made the convergence look like child's play. The galaxy wasn't just under attack, it was being systematically hunted. "Why didn't you warn us about this sooner?" Ben's voice was hard, controlled. "Why keep us in the dark? Why wait until we were already in the thick of it?" The Corvani diplomat's eyes lowered. "We had no choice. The Nexus was designed to be a tool, a test. We believed if we stopped it, we could contain the threat. But the Conclave is far more powerful. They've manipulated the Nexus's creation. They've been waiting for us to grow weak, and now they have found their opportunity." Ben's mind raced. So what now? Do we fight them? Do we try to negotiate? What is the plan here? The diplomat shook his head slowly. There is no negotiation with the conclave. They do not understand the concept of surrender, and fighting them head-on will lead to extinction. We need to cut off their supply lines. We need to weaken their hold on the galaxy before they can complete their assimilation. Amy's eyes widened. And how do you propose we do that? What kind of weapon are we talking about? The diplomat glanced around the room, as if checking to ensure no one was listening too closely. We don't have a weapon, yet, but there is something in the galactic archives, a weapon from an ancient civilization that was destroyed by the conclave. We believe it could be the key to disrupting their plans, but it's deep within the heart of their territory, and we will need your fleet to get us there. Ben was silent for a moment, considering the enormity of the task. The stakes were higher than ever. The conclave wasn't just a threat, they were a looming shadow over the galaxy. But the Corvani were right, there was no room for hesitation. They had to take the fight to them. I'm in, Ben said, his voice resolute. We'll find this weapon, we'll hit them where it hurts, but I need to know one thing and I need the truth. Who are we really dealing with here? The conclave, the Nexus, how does this all fit together? The diplomat hesitated, his eyes flicking toward his companions. Finally he spoke, his voice soft but filled with gravity. The Nexus is the first step, he said, but the true power behind it is a race known as the Architects. They were the ones who created the Nexus, and they are coming to finish what they started. They have been manipulating the galaxy's progress for centuries, sowing the seeds of destruction in order to reshape everything in their image. The Conclave and the Nexus are their tools, their servants. The Architects will come soon, and when they do, there will be no hope for survival. Ben stood slowly, his mind reeling. So we're fighting the servants, but the true enemy is still out there, coming for us. Yes, the diplomat confirmed. Ben turned to Amy, then to Dr. Carter, who both met his gaze. There was no question in his mind what had to be done. They couldn't just fight the Nexus or the Conclave. They had to fight the Architects themselves. Then we fight, Ben said, his voice a hard whisper of defiance. We fight for every last star, for every world in this galaxy, and we don't stop until we take them down, whatever it takes. The Corvani left the meeting room, leaving behind a grim sense of urgency and determination. The human fleet had a new mission, a mission to infiltrate the heart of enemy territory and find a weapon capable of ending the Architects' reign before it even began. But with each passing moment, the stakes grew higher, and the odds seemed more impossible. Ben Rodriguez stood alone for a moment, staring out at the stars. The weight of the universe pressed down on him, but he wouldn't flinch. This fight was far from over, and no matter what happened next, humanity's place in the galaxy had already been secured. They were the galaxy's last hope, and they would never give up. The stars outside the Unity glowed with an eerie calm as the fleet prepared to make the final jump into the heart of the Conclave's territory. The galaxy was teetering on the brink of destruction, but Ben Rodriguez felt a strange sense of purpose coursing through him. The mission was clear, and the stakes had never been higher. Humanity's fate, and the fate of countless other civilizations, rested on the edge of a blade. Inside the command room, the crew worked tirelessly. Amy Collins stood at the tactical station, her eyes scanning data streams with relentless focus. Dr. Sam Carter was reviewing the final calculations for the pulse weapon, their last hope against the Architects and their monstrous servants. The Corvani scientists had provided all the information they had on the weapon, a relic from an ancient civilization that had once been destroyed by the Conclave. It was their only shot at disrupting the Architects' control over the galaxy. Captain, Amy said, her voice steady despite the tension, we're approaching the edge of their territory. If the data we've received is correct, we should be able to locate the weapon's coordinates in the next few hours. Ben nodded but said nothing. His mind was already on the battle that lay ahead. The Unity wasn't just the flagship of Earth's fleet anymore, it was the spearhead of a desperate campaign to save the galaxy. He turned to Carter, who was lost in his calculations. How long until we're in range? Not long, Carter replied, his voice strained. Once we enter their core systems, the weapon's coordinates should lock in, but there's a catch. It's not just hidden, it's protected by layers of encryption, biological defenses, and conclave fleets. We'll be walking straight into the heart of their stronghold. Ben's jaw tightened. How much time do we have once we get close? Maybe an hour, 2 at the most, Carter said. Any longer and we'll be detected. Once they realize we're after the weapon, they'll send everything they've got to stop us. Amy's fingers flew across the console. "Conclave ships detected," she said, her voice tense. "At least 3 Dreadnought-class ships closing in on us. They're faster than we expected." Ben took a deep breath. "All ships prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're going in fast and we're going in hard. We don't give them time to respond. Whatever happens, we keep moving, no matter what." The Unity surged forward, cutting through space like a blade. The massive dreadnoughts of the Conclave were closing in fast, their weapons charging. The human fleet scattered, moving in unpredictable patterns to confuse and disorient the enemy. The warships behind them followed the same strategy, launching diversionary missiles and pulse blasts to keep the Conclave ships off balance. "Captain," Amy said, her voice tinged with alarm. "They're adapting faster than we thought. The Nexus was bad enough, but these Conclave ships, they're designed to counter everything we've thrown at them. We're not going to hold them off for long." "We don't have to," Ben replied. "We just have to get close enough to the weapon, hold them off for as long as we can, then we make our move." Minutes turned into hours as the battle raged around them. The Unity and its fleet held their ground, their unpredictability and relentless aggression keeping the Conclave ships at bay. But with every passing minute, the enemy adapted. The human fleet had no choice but to press on, pushing forward even as the odds seemed impossible. Finally, the signal came. "Captain, we've locked onto the coordinates," Carter said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and urgency. "The weapon's just ahead in a heavily guarded station, but we've only got one shot at this. If we don't strike now, we lose it all." "All ships follow me," Ben ordered. "We hit them hard and we hit them fast, no hesitations. This is humanity's last stand. Do it for Earth, do it for every life out there." The human fleet broke through the last layer of Conclave defenses, cutting their way through waves of enemies in a deadly dance. The weapon was within their grasp, a massive structure hidden within a gargantuan station, built into the heart of a ruined star system. Ben's heart raced as he saw the weapon, an ancient device glowing with raw power. It was more than just a weapon. It was the key to destroying the Nexus and the Conclave once and for all. But they weren't alone. The Conclave had prepared for this moment. Massive energy barriers surrounded the weapon, protected by thousands of enemy ships, each one moving in perfect coordination. "Now," Ben shouted, "fire everything we've got, take down the shield." The Unity and the Allied ships unleashed their full firepower, a wave of plasma, missiles, and electromagnetic pulses that hit the shield with everything they had. But the shield held. "We're not going to make it through that thing," Amy said, her voice tinged with fear. "It's too strong. It's like nothing we've seen before." Ben's gaze locked onto the weapon, his mind racing. There was only one way to get through. He turned to Carter. "Is there another way? A way we can bypass the shield?" Carter paused, his face pale. "We could try an EMP strike, target the core of the shield generator, but we'd need to be right on top of it. One mistake and we're done." "Then we're getting close," Ben said, determination hardening his voice. "We don't have a choice. All ships follow my lead, close the distance." The Unity pushed forward, its engines roaring as it plunged into the heart of the Conclave's defenses. The weapon was so close now, Ben could almost feel the pulse of energy that surged from it. They were mere kilometers away when the first salvo of Conclave fire hit them, tearing through the shields of the Unity. "Brace for impact," Amy shouted. The Unity rocked violently, but the crew held firm, focusing on the task at hand. The moment was approaching. Ben's grip tightened on the armrests. "Now," Ben shouted, slamming his fist into the console. "EMP strike full power." The Unity's systems surged as the electromagnetic pulse blasted from the ship's core, a wave of energy that slammed into the shield generator. For a moment, everything went still. The Unity rocked again, but this time the shield faltered. "Captain, the shield's weakening," Amy exclaimed. "We've got a window." Ben didn't hesitate. "All ships concentrate fire on the core. We take the weapon or we die trying." The fleet fired everything they had left, a concentrated barrage of energy and weaponry that hit the weapon's core. The massive structure shuddered, its defenses collapsing under the onslaught. The weapon, once thought indestructible, began to crumble. "Captain," Carter said, his voice trembling. "It's working. The weapon is destabilizing. It's going critical." Ben's heart pounded in his chest. "Get us out of here, full retreat, now." The human fleet broke off, engines roaring as they sped away from the now exploding weapon. The shockwave from the weapon's destruction rippled through space, sending massive waves of energy in all directions. "Did we do it?" Amy asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Ben's eyes stayed locked on the explosion in the distance. The weapon was gone, destroyed in a burst of blinding light. "We've done more than that," he said quietly. "We've sent a message we'll never give up, not today, not ever." As the fleet limped back to their base, battered and scarred from the battle, Ben knew that this was just the beginning. The architects were still out there, and the galaxy was still in danger. But humanity had proven something that day. They had proven that they would never bow down, never be defeated, and in that small victory they had earned their place in the stars. And as Ben stood on the bridge, watching the stars fade into the darkness, he knew one thing for sure. Humanity was ready for whatever came next.